Marcus Webb was 41 years old when he came home 2 hours early on a Tuesday night and watched his wife laugh at something her ex-boyfriend said while he stood in the kitchen Marcus had renovated with his own hands, drinking the beer Marcus had bought. Leaning against the countertop Marcus had installed piece by piece the summer after their wedding. For 11 years, Marcus had been a structural engineer at a mid-sized firm in Columbus, Ohio. He left the house at 5:30 every morning in a 2014 Ford F-150 with a long crack across the passenger side mirror he'd never bothered to replace. He carried a thermos of black coffee and a Warnfield notebook in his jacket pocket. He fixed things: load-bearing walls, drainage problems on commercial sites, hairline fractures in concrete foundations that no one else caught until they became disasters. He was the kind of man who found problems before they became catastrophic, and he was good at it in the quiet way of someone who never needed anyone to notice. Her name was Caitlin. They had met when Marcus was 30. She had a laugh that arrived without warning, and a way of talking about the future as if it were already built and waiting. They bought a house in Clintonville. They talked about kids, then quietly stopped talking about kids, and Marcus learned to hold that silence without making it heavier. He showed up. He fixed the leaking pipe under the kitchen sink. He sanded the hardwood floors himself on a long weekend in July. He came home every night and made dinner when she worked late and never kept score, because keeping score meant you thought the person you loved was your opponent. Ryan Cho had been her college boyfriend. He had reappeared in their lives 14 months ago, first as a name in a text Caitlin mentioned in passing, then as a face at a mutual friend's birthday party where Marcus shook his hand and thought nothing of it, then as a reason she needed to grab coffee to catch up, then as someone she was helping with a work thing, and then as someone who had apparently developed a habit of dropping by to say hi on the evenings Marcus worked late. What Ryan didn't know, and what Caitlin hadn't thought to consider, was that Marcus had finished his site inspection 3 hours ahead of schedule and driven home through a February evening that was going dark and cold. And he had seen Ryan's Mazda in the driveway from the end of the block. What she also hadn't considered was that Marcus owned the house outright. His name, his deed, his signature on every document that had ever mattered. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The alarm went off at 5:14 a.m. That Tuesday morning, the same as every morning, Marcus sat up in the dark, let it pass, and got up without lying there. He dressed in the bathroom to avoid waking Caitlin, work pants, thermal undershirt, the gray Carhartt he'd owned for 6 years. He filled his thermos in the kitchen, black, no sugar, and screwed the lid tight. Through the window above the sink, the sky was still absolute dark, the street lamp at the corner throwing its orange cone onto the driveway where the F-150 sat with its cracked mirror and its 134,000 miles. He had a 7:00 a.m. walkthrough at a commercial site in Gahanna, a mixed-use development that had been behind schedule since October. His firm had brought him in 6 weeks ago to assess a foundation issue that the original structural team had signed off on without looking closely enough at the soil report. Marcus had spent 4 days reviewing the data and found what they missed: a subsurface drainage problem that would have expressed itself as foundation settlement within 3 years, which would have expressed itself as litigation, which would have expressed itself as a very bad day for everyone involved. He drove east on 270 with the thermos between his knees and NPR keeping quiet company. The morning was flat and colorless. He had 3 inspections scheduled, a client call at 2, and a meeting with the project manager at 4 to go over revised load calculations. He had been doing this for 17 years. He knew how to move through a complex day without losing anything. Caitlin had been at the firm for 4 years, a different firm, marketing. She had been promoted twice, which she was proud of, which Marcus was genuinely glad about. In the last year, she had started coming home later, buying things without mentioning them. A coat he didn't recognize, a weekend bag, a pair of wireless earbuds she said were for the gym. He had noticed. He had the particular awareness of someone trained to find what other people overlooked, and he noticed, and he filed it, and he told himself there were explanations, and he believed it the way you believe things you choose to believe. He arrived at the Gahanna site at 6:52. The foreman, a man named Dennis who had been in construction longer than Marcus had been alive, met him at the chain-link gate with a clipboard. They walked the south foundation together. Marcus crouched with his flashlight and his notebook, marking observations with a mechanical pencil he kept in his breast pocket. Dennis watched him work. At one point he said, "You see something?" And Marcus said, "Not yet," and then 5 minutes later, "Here." He marked the spot with a chalk X and clipped his notes to Dennis's board. The client call ran short. The 4 o'clock meeting wrapped in 50 minutes instead of 90 because Marcus had already prepared the revised calculations and the project manager had no questions he hadn't anticipated. By 5:40 he was in his truck, heading home. The February dark already total. The kind of cold that makes the inside of a car feel sealed and private. He turned onto his street and saw the Mazda. It was parked one house down from theirs, which was either considerate or strategic, and he wasn't sure which was worse. He recognized it from the birthday party, from the driveway the one evening Caitlin said Ryan had stopped by to pick something up, from the edge of his peripheral attention for the past several months. He sat at the stop sign at the end of the block for a moment. He did not floor it. He did not turn around. He pulled forward slowly and parked at the curb 3 houses past his own. He sat in the truck with the engine off. The kitchen light was on. He could see it from where he was sitting, the warm rectangle of it through the front window, and he could see 2 figures moving in it, not quickly, not urgently, in the casual way of people who are at ease, who are not expecting anyone. Marcus sat for 7 minutes. The cold came in quickly when the engine was off. He opened the truck door and walked to the house. He had a key. He always had a key. He unlocked the front door and stepped inside, and the warmth of the house came at him in the hallway, the smell of something cooking, coffee, and underneath it something he couldn't name, except that it felt wrong, some arrangement of elements that didn't belong to him. He heard her laugh before he reached the kitchen. It was a real laugh, full and unpracticed, the kind he used to be the reason for. He heard Ryan's voice underneath it saying something he couldn't make out, low and warm and designed for exactly this kind of room. He stood in the hallway for 2 seconds, and then he turned the corner, and he was in the kitchen, and they were both there, Caitlin at the counter with her wine glass, Ryan leaning against the island Marcus had built himself the summer of their 4th year, and the moment split into freeze and motion simultaneously, her face going from open and lit to something compressed and careful, his posture shifting from easy to upright. "Marcus," Caitlin said. He looked at Ryan first. Ryan was holding a beer. His beer. He was a tall man, well-dressed in the effortless way of someone whose money was visible without being announced, and he had the face of someone who had made this kind of calculation before and knew the variables. He nodded at Marcus, which was either composure or the particular arrogance of someone who is never really expected to lose. Marcus looked at Caitlin. "You're home early," she said. "Yeah," he said. He put his thermos on the counter by the door. He took off his jacket and hung it on the hook. He looked at the room, his island, his countertop, his pendant light he'd wired himself because the electrician had quoted $300, and Marcus was the kind of man who looked at a job and thought, I could do that. He was just dropping by, Caitlin said. We were just talking. Marcus looked at Ryan's beer. He looked at her wine. He looked at the pan on the stove with something in it she'd been making. Something careful and good. The kind of effort that doesn't happen for dropping by. He said, okay. He walked through the kitchen, past both of them, and went upstairs. He sat on the edge of the bed in the dark and listened to the sounds from below, lowered voices, movement. The front door opening and closing. Her footsteps on the stairs. He was still in his work clothes. His field notebook was still in his jacket pocket downstairs. He had not had dinner. He sat with his hands on his knees and he looked at the floor and he thought about load-bearing walls, which was not a metaphor. He genuinely thought about the revised calculations he had handed to the project manager at 4 o'clock. The precision of it. The way a good assessment tells you exactly what is happening and where and what the failure point will be if nothing changes. Caitlin appeared in the doorway. It's not what you're thinking, she said. He looked at her. He had been with this woman for 11 years. He had shared every ordinary morning with her, every small failure, every quiet success. He had watched her sleep. He knew her face in every light. Okay, he said. He was just Caitlin. He said her name gently. Not as a correction, as a stop. She went quiet. He said, I'm going to need a minute. She left. He heard her downstairs. He sat for a long time. He didn't explode. That wasn't who he was. The men who exploded were the men who let things build without looking at them. Marcus had been looking at this, not at Ryan specifically, but at the space that had been opening between him and Caitlin for the past year. The small withdrawals. The conversations that didn't quite arrive. The laugh he used to be the reason for. He had been looking at it the way he looked at everything. Carefully, without flinching. Trying to understand the load before he decided what to do about it. He went downstairs at 9 o'clock. Caitlin was on the couch with her phone. The kitchen had been cleaned. The wine glass was in the drying rack. He sat in the chair across from her and said, How long? She didn't pretend not to understand. That was something he would hold on to later. She didn't insult him with pretending. We haven't done anything, she said. I want you to know that. How long have you been seeing him? I haven't been, she stopped. She looked at him for a moment. 8 months, she said. We've been talking for 8 months. 8 months. He had made her lunch 8 months ago on a weekday. He had fixed the gutter she mentioned in passing. He had shown up every day for 8 months of a marriage to a woman who had been building something else on the side. Are you in love with him? He said. She took a long time. I don't know, she said, which was a different kind of answer. He nodded. He went upstairs, and he slept, and he did not dream, and in the morning he got up at 5:14 and filled his thermos and drove to work, and on his lunch break he called his brother Darius. Darius was 3 years older and built like someone who had never stopped playing football, which was accurate, and he had the particular quality of a person whose first instinct to every problem was forward motion. Marcus told him what had happened, and Darius was quiet for longer than expected. Then Darius said, The house. What about it? The house is in your name. Yes, only your name. Yes, Darius exhaled slowly. Okay, he said. Okay, so what do you want to do? What Marcus wanted was a thing he couldn't name yet, which was less about Ryan and less about the 8 months, and more about the particular understanding he was arriving at, which was that the person he had built his life around had been building something else and had decided not to tell him, and had looked him in the eye every morning while that was true, and that he had noticed the signs and chosen to believe the comfortable version, and that this was information about both of them. "I want to understand the situation completely before I do anything," Marcus said. "That's the right call," Darius said. "That is absolutely the right call." He saw an attorney 2 weeks later. Her name was Sandra Okafor, and she had an office in downtown Columbus with 2 degrees on the wall from Ohio State. In a manner that communicated she had been in this room with men like Marcus many times, and had never once found the situation irredeemable. Marcus brought a folder. In the folder was the deed to the house, purchased 6 years before he and Caitlin married, titled solely to him. A financial summary he had assembled from their joint accounts. A careful accounting of his separate assets, the house, a rental property in Franklinton he had bought 11 years ago and renovated himself, and a family parcel of land in Muskingum County that had come to him from his grandfather and was worth, in the current market, considerably more than Caitlin had ever thought to ask about. Sandra reviewed everything without hurrying. When she was finished, she looked up. "Have you discussed separation with your wife?" she said. "No. Has she indicated she wants to leave the marriage?" "Not formally, but functionally." He thought about it. "Yes," he said. Sandra nodded. She set the folder flat on the desk and explained, with the specific patience of someone who had done this many times, that Ohio was an equitable distribution state, which meant marital assets were divided fairly rather than equally, and that separate property, assets acquired before the marriage or received as inheritance, was protected. The house was separate property. The Franklinton rental was separate property. The Muskingum County land was separate property. She'd have a claim on marital contributions to the home, Sandra said. Renovation work done during the marriage, improvements, did she contribute to those? "I did all the work myself," Marcus said. Sandra looked at him for a moment. "All of it, most of it. Some I hired out. Those records exist." "Good," she leaned back slightly. "Mr. Webb, depending on how this proceeds, your exposure is limited. Her contribution to the marital estate is largely professional income, which is split. But the major assets you're describing were never marital to begin with." He drove home that night and sat in the driveway for a few minutes before going in. The house was lit up in that same warm rectangle. He looked at it the way he sometimes looked at completed work, a finished wall, a solved problem, something that had been made with patience and precision and would last. He and Caitlin existed in the house together for the next 3 weeks in a careful, low-temperature arrangement. They did not fight. They talked when they needed to talk, and were quiet when they didn't. He cooked. She watched television. They had had worse weeks, honestly, except that those weeks had not been an ending. Ryan's name came up once. Caitlin said she had told him to give them space. Marcus said okay. He did not know whether to believe it, and he understood that knowing no longer changed anything. What he was doing in those 3 weeks was not waiting. He was documenting. He pulled together 11 years of financial records with the same method he brought to a site inspection. Thorough, systematic, not hurrying toward conclusions he hadn't earned. He logged his own financial records, his separate accounts, every renovation receipt he could find. The cost logs he had always kept by habit, because he was a man who had grown up understanding that the difference between a well-built thing and a problem was documentation. He drove out to Muskingum County on a Saturday and walked the land with his boots on the frozen ground, 43 acres of timber and creek bed, and a meadow that opened wide to the east. Land that had been in his family for 3 generations. Land that a developer had made an inquiry about the previous spring, and Marcus had declined without drama because he wasn't ready. and because his grandfather had told him, in a voice that did not leave room for argument, that you hold land until you know exactly what it's worth. He met Sandra again in early March. She had reviewed everything. "You're in a strong position," she said. "I know," he said. "Has there been any movement on her end toward filing? Not that I'm aware of. Do you want to file?" He thought about it. "I want to be the one who's prepared," he said. "Whenever it happens." Sandra nodded. She understood the distinction. The conversation happened on a Sunday evening in late March. Caitlin came downstairs when he was at the kitchen table with his coffee, and she sat across from him, and she said, with the particular steadiness of someone who had been rehearsing, that she thought they needed to talk about what they were doing. He looked at her. 11 years. The laugh in the kitchen, the front door, the sound of her footsteps on the stairs. He had loved this woman in the complete way of someone who doesn't keep anything in reserve. "Okay," he said. She said she was sorry. She said it was real, and she knew what she was doing, and she didn't want to pretend anymore that they were going to get through this. She said Ryan was in the picture, and she wasn't going to lie about that anymore. She said she thought he deserved to know. He sat with all of it for a long time. Then he said, "Did you know I own this house outright?" She blinked. "What? The house? It's in my name, before we were married." She looked at him. Something shifted in her face, not panic. Not quite, but the first movement of it, the initial understanding that a thing she had assumed was different from what she'd assumed. "I have a rental property," he said. "Franklinton, also before the marriage." He paused. "And my grandfather left me land in Muskingum County, 43 acres. I got an inquiry from a developer last spring for a number I declined because it was still low." She was very still. "I'm not telling you this to threaten you," he said. "I'm telling you because I want you to understand the full picture before your attorney tells it to you, because I'd rather you hear it from me." He stood up. He put his coffee cup in the sink. He said, "I'll stay at Darius's for a while. We can work through Sandra's office. Her number is on the counter." He went upstairs. He packed a bag with the same efficiency he packed his site kit. Nothing extra, nothing forgotten, what was needed and nothing more. He came downstairs, took his jacket from the hook, took his thermos. He picked up his field notebook from the counter and put it in his inside pocket. Caitlin was still sitting at the table. "Marcus," she said. He stopped. "I didn't know," she said. Her voice was very quiet. "About any of that." "I never." "I know," he said. "You never asked." He went out. He drove to Darius's house across town, and Darius had the guest room made up and coffee going, and the good sense not to ask too many questions. Marcus sat at his brother's kitchen table and drank coffee and looked at the window and thought about the Muskingum County land, the meadow that opened east, the creek that ran along the south property line, the developer's inquiry he had declined. He thought about what it was worth. He thought about the fact that Caitlin had been in his life for 11 years and had never once asked what his grandfather had left him. He had not hidden it from her. He simply hadn't announced it. He was not a man who announced things. The divorce proceedings moved on Sandra's timeline, which was careful and deliberate, and did not leave anything for the other side to work with. The Clintonville house was separate property, the deed predating the marriage by 6 years. The Franklinton rental was separate property. The Muskingum County land was a premarital inheritance. Caitlin's attorney identified the joint accounts, the marital income, the shared savings, all of which divided in a settlement that Sandra called straightforward. Ryan drove a Porsche Cayenne. It emerged during the proceedings, through no particular investigation, that the Porsche was financed at 90%, and he was 22 months behind on a personal loan. Marcus noted this and moved on. The men who never really had what they appeared to have were the ones who wore it the loudest. He had known this since he was young. The settlement was signed on a Thursday afternoon in a conference room with pale walls and a table that had been wiped down recently and still smelled faintly of cleaner. Caitlin sat across from him with her attorney, and she looked like someone at the end of a long effort. She had the marital savings, her professional income, her half of what had accumulated together. She did not have the house. She did not have the rental property. She did not have the Muskingum County land. She looked at him once across the table. He held her eyes. He felt nothing complicated. He felt the particular kind of clear that comes after something has been fully understood. He signed the documents. Sandra signed. It was done. He called the developer 6 weeks later and arranged a meeting. The inquiry from the previous spring had been preliminary. The developer came back with a number that Marcus looked at for a long time without letting his face do anything. And then he said, "That's closer." And the developer said, "What would you need to see?" And Marcus told him. They went back and forth 3 times over 4 weeks, and the final number was the kind of number that changed the shape of the years ahead. He did not buy a new truck. He did not move somewhere dramatic. He bought a parcel of property in a quiet neighborhood in Worthington. A lot with a house on it that was structurally sound but cosmetically unfinished. The kind of project he had always worked on best. A thing that needed someone willing to look at it long enough to understand what it could become. He spent 6 months on it. He refinished the floors. He rebuilt the porch. He installed custom cabinetry in the kitchen, measured twice, cut once, secured to last. He heard from Darius that Ryan's Porsche had been repossessed in the summer. He heard from Darius because Darius had seen it happen and called him laughing. But Marcus didn't laugh because he wasn't built for that, and also because it wasn't about Ryan. It had never been about Ryan. Ryan was a circumstance. The thing he was working through was older and larger than one man's bad decisions. He settled into his house in the fall. He had a back porch he had built himself from lumber he had selected and milled, and he put 2 Adirondack chairs on it, cedar, that he had assembled on a long Saturday morning. He sat in one of them on an October evening with his coffee going slightly cold in his hands, and the sound of leaves moving in the yard, and the quiet that comes after a year of careful forward motion. He did not check his phone. He did not think about Caitlin in any way that required him to carry it. He sat with the evening and drank his coffee and looked at the yard, which was his yard, his ground, his particular rectangle of the world, and thought about what he was going to do next. There was a commercial project in Lancaster he had been asked to assess. There was his niece's birthday on Saturday. There was the gutter on the north side that needed attention before the winter rain started. He finished the coffee. He went inside. He closed the door behind him and left the rest of it where it was. He had built a good life once. He was building a better one now. He did not need anyone to see it to know that it was real. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.